This is the Neo 65, Critic Key's replacement for the QK 65, but is it good enough to take the place of the keyboard that changed the budget market? Let's find out. It comes in this really nice case that reminds me of the Mode Envoy's case, but we'll talk more about that later. Your keyboard comes wrapped up sitting at the bottom of the case, and aside from that you also get a gummy O-ring and a set of gaskets, your rubber feet and screws, 2 ribbon cables, and a 2.4Hz wireless dongle if you chose to get the tri-mode PCB. As for the plate, I've chosen to go with FR4 once again because I want to do a direct comparison to another QK board of mine later in the video. You technically could go plateless and save even more money if you get a solder-only PCB, but let's be honest, no one's gonna do that. I've chosen instead the hot swap tri-mode PCB because it's like $5 more than the wired one. There are no flex cut options though. Included as well are your pour-on and plate foams, as well as case foam sitting inside of the keyboard already. I've seen no indication that this keyboard was designed to go foamless. Outside of the carrying case, you also get a small little box of accessories. This includes a set of clip-in stabilizers, which are not owl stabs, a switch and keycap puller, a USB-A to USB-C cable, and a tiny 1.5H screwdriver. The keyboard itself comes in this bag, but it's also plastic wrapped as well. The previous QK boards I've bought didn't do this, so I'm not sure why the additional plastic was added. This is a single-piece board, unlike the QK boards, which needed the top and bottom halves to be screwed together, but we'll still be putting that screwdriver to work later when building this keyboard. But for now, I'll be using it to pop this plastic like a balloon. Let's put the internal foam to the side for now so we can take a closer look at the keyboard. As you can see, it has the little semicircles cut out like the Bakaneko did because you can O-ring mount this keyboard as well as use traditional gaskets. I'm not sure why holes are cut out in the bottom of the case so that you can see the batteries, but hopefully it doesn't hurt. The side profile is very plain. It doesn't make it the easiest to pick up this keyboard, but it's not hard either. As for the weight, I've gone with the Mirror Dusk option. It's very classy, and I like it a lot more than the QK100's camping themed one. We'll be taking off the PO after putting on the feet. Speaking of which, you have the option of black or white feet, but be careful. Some of them have holes cut out, and those are the ones that are supposed to go onto weight. I wish they cut the holes out of all of them because I made the mistake of putting them in the wrong place and had to redo it. The bottom ones don't have the area touching your desk anyway, so either way it wouldn't make a difference in terms of their grip surface, so I'm not sure why they did that. There's not that much grip surface anyways though. These things are tiny compared to every other keyboard I own. But it's not an issue, my Neo 65 isn't flying around my desk or anything. With that done, let's start building our keyboard. It comes with clip-in stabilizers because you can't use screw-in ones with an O-ring mounted keyboard from what I understand. And inside of the stabilizers bag were these things. I don't know what they are, and if any of you do, please tell me. The stabs are listed as Neo stabs on a Notion page. They don't require clipping, just a bit of lube, and I haven't had any issues with them yet. I'm assuming these are going to come with all future Neo boards thanks to the name. Once the stabilizers are in, we have to manually install the standoffs ourselves. Well, we don't have to if we're using the gasket mounts, but it doesn't hurt and it lets us change to the O-ring mount later if we want. Unfortunately, it's kind of a pain in the ass. We install these by dropping one of the screws in and then twisting the standoff into place from the other side. Getting the screw into place is already hard enough, and then you have to twist a tiny little standoff in there as well. You have to do this on 4 different holes, and it's not fun. None of the previous QK boards made you do this, but none of the previous QK boards could be O-ring mounted either, so I guess it's worth the trade-off. After getting all 4 into place, we can screw in the plate. If you want to use the plate and pour-on foam, make sure that those are in there first. They have holes that align with the standoffs, so make sure they're not blocking the screw holes. Instead of using the provided tiny screwdriver, I'll be using my electronic one. We only need a 1.5H bit to assemble and disassemble the whole thing. But even if you choose to not install the standoffs, you'll need the screwdriver later for the weight. Now we could choose to use the gummy O-ring, but for a more apples to apples comparison to a QK board, I'm opting to use the provided gaskets instead. You only have one option for gaskets compared to the previous 2 of the QK boards, but the ones provided should please most people. To install them, we just slide them into place in the 10 slots around the PCB. But now for the worst part of the build. This keyboard doesn't use JST cables like everyone else, you have to use a ribbon cable. And it sucks to install. I'm not kidding when I say it took 10 minutes to connect just one side of this cable. If it looks like I'm struggling, it's because I am, and I use ribbon cables every day at work. These suck. Once you've got it in though, you can either continue building the keyboard or dread plugging it into the other side. I chose both. Now you may have noticed that there is no visible daughter board to plug the ribbon cable into. That's because it is underneath the weight, on the back of the keyboard. To get the ribbon cable in there, we have to get it into the tiny hole in the center of the keyboard while sliding the whole PCB into the board. I want to once again reiterate so that this is very clear, this sucks. We do this regardless of which mounting style you use. We don't have to screw the PCB into the case though, the holes cut out of the case should keep the gaskets in place. Or if you O-ring mounted it, the tension should keep the PCB from falling out. I gave it a good couple shakes to make sure and it doesn't seem to be an issue at all. To plug in the ribbon cable, we'll have to remove the weight by unscrewing the 2 screws on top. That's why the 2 upper feet had to have holes in them. There is a hole to help you lift the weight up, but I couldn't do it with just my fingers. Underneath the weight, you should find the daughter board and batteries if you ordered the tri-mode PCB, and hopefully a ribbon cable ready to be plugged in. Mine was not. I ended up having to use tweezers to pull it up all the way through the hole. There is the option of taking off the weight first and then routing the cables through as you're sliding into PCB, but then the batteries in this keyboard wouldn't be secured and it can fall out, so be careful if you try it that way. In case you're wondering, connecting the ribbon cable to the daughter board only took me 8 minutes this time, which is incredible because you have way less wiggle room to work with. This ribbon cable is exactly as long as it needs to be with no extra length. After screwing the weight back on, we can finally peel the plastic off this beautiful weight. Now it's a little hard for me to show you exactly what this looks like in real life, because I only have a single light blasting onto my table to light this scene, but in real life it looks more dark than this, but classier in a way. I don't know how else to describe it. But it's time to compare the Neo 65 to a QK board. I don't have the QK 65, so instead we'll be using my next closest thing, the QK 80, which uses a chroma mirror weight. In case you haven't seen my video on this, my QK 80 uses an FR4 plate with KNC clackbit switches. The keycaps are GMK Civilizations, which I got before the whole Mexico situation. Take a listen. In that video, I said that I have a special board coming for those keycaps. This is not that keyboard. That keyboard keeps getting delayed, so I figured I'd test this keyboard with the exact same switches and keycaps via my keycap and switch transfer technique. If we just do a push right now, and then we gently take off our keyboard, you'll see that our switches and keycaps have magically transferred over to the Neo 65. And it was at this point when I was getting ready to do the typing test that I realized that I forgot to put in the case foam, so... Remember when I said I didn't have to do that ever again? But once the case foam is in, let's find out how the Neo 65 compares to a higher end QK board. But wait, there's more! See, when it comes to this board, the thing that makes it special aside from the fact that it's from QWERTY Keys is that you can actually buy this board. And another 65% keyboard that you can buy these days that people compare the Neo 65 to for some reason is the Mode Envoy. I did a video on this keyboard just last week. Check it out if you want to hear the typing test without me talking over it. But the reason I took a look at it so late in its life was because I also wanted to compare it to the Neo 65. Now I couldn't do an apples to apples comparison because I configured my Envoy with as much copper as possible, but I had to. I just couldn't resist that green and copper combo. I can't talk about the rest of the design though, and when it comes to the side profile, I think the Envoy wins. They both have a similar angle and shape, but the Envoy is more rounded and soft, whereas the Neo is very hard and harsh. I do like the Neo's weight better though. Even if you get the Envoy with a similar weight, it doesn't have any design on it. The Neo does, and it's just very classy in my opinion. But the Envoy's feet are just objectively better. In addition to having more surface area, the top feet also can't fall off because they're actually held in place by the weight. I wish the Neo did this as well, since you have to take the weight off no matter what you do. The bottom feet could still fall off, but again, the Envoys just have more surface area. The Mode Envoy does have one problem though that I've never seen in any other keyboard. Pressing down too hard on the top causes it to topple over. Now, in my Mode Envoy video, I said it's not a problem for me in normal typing, but I can imagine it would be for some of you. I don't know how they overlooked this when they were designing the Envoy, but I hope it's not an issue with the tempo. The Neo 65 definitely doesn't have this issue, so that's a point in favor of the Neo. The layout isn't the only similarity between these two keyboards though, the cases also have a lot in common. Opening up the Envoy, you'll also find these little pouches holding these individual bags of your parts. The top pouch holds the plates and PCBs like all keyboards cases, but I like the Envoy's packaging materials better. The bottom is of course for the keyboard itself, but the Envoy's keyboard straps can be ripped open, making it really easy to remove and insert the keyboard. It's also just softer in there. The Neo 65's case on the other hand isn't as nice. For one thing, we have a strap instead of a handle to carry the case around. The pouches holding the bags of materials inside isn't as soft, and the bags themselves are just cheap plastic. There's not much to say about the top part of the case, but for the bottom part that holds the keyboard, those bands are just really stretchy bands, so inserting and taking out the keyboard is a lot more of a pain in the ass than the Mode Envoy. But of course, you're not buying a keyboard for its case. Well, technically you are, you're buying it for the keyboard case itself, but when it comes to the carrying case, that's almost irrelevant unless you're going to take your keyboard with you all the time. I would prefer to get a good keyboard with a bad case than get a bad keyboard with a good case, so don't let the Envoy's case be your deciding factor. Not to say that the Envoy itself is bad. When it comes to the tools that each keyboard provides, let's start with the keycap and switch pullers. They are both branded with each company's logos, the Mode 1 saying Mode and the Neo saying Neo, but the difference between them is that the Mode 1 is actually double-sided. It has Mode on the front and the back, whereas the Neo only has it on the front. The screwdrivers on the other hand are a completely different story. The Neo comes with this tiny little, really just waste of plastic and metal screwdriver, whereas the Mode comes with an actual screwdriver with interchangeable bits. Now they might have done this because the Mode Envoy requires more than just a 1.5H bit to assemble the keyboard, and it might have been cheaper to do it this way, but I mean, either way, it feels better than this thing that Neo provides. But again, you're not buying a keyboard for a better case or better pouches or better tools, you're buying it for the keyboard itself. And the Neo 65 is a good keyboard. It is a pain in the ass to build, but it is a good keyboard. It only sounds slightly worse than the QK80 in my opinion, and that opinion is completely subjective. You might think it sounds better. But even if you think it sounds worse, even significantly worse, you have to consider the price of this keyboard. You can buy a Neo 65 in any color with a brass weight and a tri-mode hot swap PCB with almost any plate for $110 minus $30 shipping. That's not only less than the price of a QK board, but that's half the price of the Mode Envoy. And the Mode Envoy is a good keyboard, but it's not worth 2 of these. Anyways, thanks for watching all the way to the end, and let me know what you think. Is the Neo 65 a worthy replacement for the QK65? And how do you think it stacks up against the Mode Envoy? Subscribe if you want to see me build the Neo 70 and Neo Alice in the future, and if you like this video, consider watching my video on the Mode Envoy.